Story number 1. Me and a few of my friends were in the changing rooms, getting ready for a swim session. We'd started seeing each other regularly at the gym, and over time, we got to know each other. Eventually, we began syncing up our workout and swim sessions, spotting one another during workouts and pacing each other in the pool. There were 4 of us there that day. 4 familiar faces, plus one we didn't recognize. An elderly woman, quietly going about her business in the corner. I'd never seen her before. Then, there was a sound. You know the kind, something low, distant, yet deeply unsettling. A noise that tightens your gut before your brain can even process it. It wasn't a scream or a crash exactly, more like a chaotic blend of loud bangs, muffled shouting, and the heavy, jarring sound of a scuffle. It came from somewhere just outside the dressing rooms. All of us froze. Mid-change. Mid-sentence. My eyes snapped toward the hallway that led around the corner from the locker area. I think everyone else looked the same way. And then, he came in. A man. He came thundering into the changing room like a mad animal. And I will never forget what he looked like. He wore tiny, filthy blue shorts, almost comically short. His white sleeveless t-shirt was stained, grimy, and clung to his thin, twitching frame. At the end of his wiry, pale legs were these massive brown work boots. Heavy, muddy, and completely out of place in a pool facility. Each step smashed against the tiles like gunfire. His hair was wild and tangled, patchy in places like it had been yanked out by the handful. I didn't get a long look at his face, but even a glance was enough to know that something was fundamentally wrong with him. His skin was pale and blotchy, with dry flakes peeling off in patches. Cuts and bruises covered his arms, like he'd been running through glass. And his eyes. His eyes were absolutely crazed. Wide. Unblinking. Almost shining with fever. And at the corners of his mouth. Foam. Actual, white foam. It was horrifying. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what he was holding. Gripped in his sweaty, shaking hands was a machete. Not a sleek, movie-style weapon. This thing looked old. Rusted. Nasty. It was massive and jagged, with a wicked curve to the blade, like something you'd use to hack through jungle vines. But worse. It didn't even look sharp. It looked infected. Diseased. Like just touching it would give you tetanus. And there I was. Half-dressed in my swimsuit, standing frozen with my friends, and this maniac had just charged into the women's locker room. For a second, everything stood still. He stopped when he saw us. His chest heaved. His machete trembled in his grip. Then he let out a sound. A horrible, primal sound. Not a word. Not a scream. Just a guttural, animalistic roar. Something between a growl and a scream of pure madness. And then, he ran. Right at me. I wish I could say I was brave. That I tackled him or grabbed something to fight back. But no. I screamed. Loud. The kind of scream that bursts out of your body without permission. I stumbled backward, slamming into the lockers behind me. And just as suddenly, a group of cops came bursting in after him. They were yelling, weapons drawn, screaming at him to freeze. It all happened so fast. He charged through the room, the machete waving wildly in his hand, and the cops swarmed in behind him. Looking back, I'm still in shock over how close it all was. He could have taken one of us. Grabbed us. Used us as a hostage. But he didn't. And honestly, I think about that way too often. Instead of stopping, or attacking, he just thundered straight through the dressing room. He barreled past us, tore into the shower area, and kept running, right out into the pool zone. The cops followed close behind, their boots pounding the tiled floor like thunderclaps. As he ran, the man shoved the elderly woman hard, sending her stumbling forward, straight into the path of one of the officers. She hit him face first. To his credit, the cop caught her, steadied her gently, and then, without a second's hesitation, bolted after the others. And just like that, they were gone. Out of sight. We all stood there. Silent. Shell-shocked. You could practically hear our hearts pounding in that thick, awful stillness. Then, from the pool area, came the screams. Not just startled yelps, but full-throated, terrified cries. The kind of sound people make when something real is happening, something dangerous. More shouting followed. Commands. Chaos. Confusion. And then, a single gunshot. We flinched. Some of us gasped. Nobody moved. We just looked at each other with wide, frozen eyes. The kind of look that silently asks, did that really just happen? The elderly woman was still crying. Still shaking. So, one of us stepped over to check on her, gently asking if she was okay. Thankfully, she wasn't hurt, just rattled to the core. None of us wanted to step outside that dressing room. Even though the sounds from the pool area had quieted down, there was still tension hanging in the air. A kind of nervous electricity that made it hard to breathe. Eventually, a police officer returned. He stepped into the changing room, calm but firm, and told us it was safe to come out. By then, none of us had any interest in swimming. We'd already thrown our clothes back on and were ready to get out of there. As we followed the cop toward the front desk, I happened to glance out the front windows. And there he was. The machete man. Now unarmed, at least visibly, being shoved into the back of a police car, his arms pinned tightly behind him. He looked smaller somehow. Less monstrous. But no less disturbing. Later, we found out what had happened. Apparently, he'd been wandering down the street in broad daylight, waving that machete around and threatening random people. Someone called the cops. And when they arrived, he bolted, ran straight into the gym, right into our locker room. It was never confirmed whether he actually intended to hurt anyone. But honestly, it doesn't matter. The danger felt real enough. And I'm just incredibly thankful that nobody was seriously injured. Not even the elderly woman he shoved. She never came back to that gym. And really, who could blame her? No one was hit by the officer's gunfire, either. Apparently, the shot had gone off during the pursuit, but it didn't hit anyone. As a responsible gun owner myself, especially in an open carry state, that whole incident rattled me. Since then, I've been extra paranoid. I triple-check that my safety's on every single time. But at the same time, I won't go anywhere without it now. Because you really never know who might come crashing through the door next. Or what they might be holding. As for the man, police suspected he was high, possibly on bath salts or something similar. Honestly, that checks out. It would explain the crazed strength, the erratic behavior, the foaming mouth. Thankfully, the whole thing didn't leave any lasting scars. At least not physically. But it definitely left a mark on our gym. That incident became the stuff of legend. To this day, those of us who were there still get first dibs on locker space, workout gear. We're treated like some kind of survivors club. Perks of being attacked by a machete-wielding maniac, someone once joked. And yeah, maybe they're not wrong. I'm pretty sure he went to jail. But I don't think he's still there. And that's the real reason I'm writing this. Because I think I saw him again. Not long ago, I stopped at a Wendy's. Just a regular day. I walked inside and there, mopping the floor, was a man. Clean cut. Healthier looking. But I swear to God, it was him. Same face. same bone structure. Same wild, haunted eyes. Unless he has a twin brother, then he's out. And he's working at a fast food joint not far from my gym. No machete this time. But I'll never forget the face of the madman who burst into the locker room. Not for as long as I live. Story number 2. I'm 61 now, and this happened when I was 12. Clarky, my best friend at the time, was 11. Also, for context, I'm English. As in, from England. So, sorry in advance for anything that might entail. Weirdly enough, I'm nervous writing this. You probably don't need to know that, but, well, I'll stress this much. This event has haunted me my whole life. Even now, if I think about it too long, I start to feel sick. Physically sick. And I think once you hear the full story, you'll understand why. I met Clark when I was still in primary school. We met in infants, our first year, at a small suburban primary school. He was playing with action figures on a playmat in the corner when I first found him. From that moment on, we were inseparable. He was my best mate. I was his. We had other friends, sure. We weren't loners or anything, just normal, regular kids who sort of naturally became part of the normal regular lads at school. If you'd asked me back then, I would have told you we were the popular ones. At least among the boys. Always up to something. Always getting into some kind of trouble. Nothing serious, though. The adults liked us. Other kids wanted to hang out with us. I was more of the leader. Clarky? He was the follower. But it never felt unequal. We were partners in crime. And when the time came for us to move on to big school in town, neither of us had any real concerns. No fear. No doubts. Just excitement. Christ on a cracker. What naive little lads we were. If you don't know, the school system's a bit different here in the UK. We don't have middle school like in the States. You go straight from primary into secondary. So when you're 11, you make this sudden, jarring leap. From a small, cozy school with kids no older than 11. To a massive, chaotic one where some of your classmates are 16. Even 18, depending on the school. It's a shock. One day you're king of the playground. And the next, you're a tiny little squirt surrounded by hulking, terrifying monsters. We were not prepared, man. Not even a little. We were just absolutely, completely out of our depth. Walked up that driveway like kings on the first day. And by the end of it, we crawled back out no more than broken, quivering wrecks. That crash, from primary to secondary, is brutal. And to this day, I insist it's actively damaging to kids. That sudden, extreme shift, it's too much, too fast. Clarky and I had assumed, quite innocently, that all the kids from our primary school would be placed into the same classes. Made sense, right? But nope. They actually do the opposite. They intentionally split kids up. Try to encourage new friendships, they say. But to me, it just feels cruel. In our case, Clarky and I weren't just put in different classes. We were assigned to completely different houses, which, for comparison, is kind of like a US homeroom system. Our school had 6 houses. And they divided them into 2 groups, so only students from 3 houses ever had classes together. Clarky ended up in blue. I was put in red. Which meant, not a single shared class. Not one. Thankfully, we still got to see each other during break and lunch. But damn, it was rough. Worse than we expected. And to top it all off, we suddenly became deeply, painfully unpopular. I could sit here and speculate a dozen reasons why. But honestly, it doesn't matter. We were just struggling. Both of us. Hard. And we couldn't even cling to each other for support because we spent most of the day apart. Sure, we still hung out after school. Still played at each other's houses on weekends. But it wasn't the same. Not anymore. And it actually hurt. Here's the thing, when you're a lonely, unpopular kid, you sort of become a beacon for trouble. Like a target painted right on your back. So of course, Clarky and I both got picked on. Bullied. One group from my half of the school made me their target. And a completely different group from Clarky's half did the same to him. Separate tormentors. Different hallways. Different scars. I don't even remember who most of those kids were. Just faceless little gits. I'm sure they grew up to be decent enough blokes. They weren't what really mattered. No, the real threat was a group we called, only behind closed doors, the bastards. Yeah. That's what we named them, in whispers, when we were safe. At my house. Or Clarky's. Never at school. Never out loud. At school, we didn't call them anything. Didn't make eye contact. Didn't breathe too loud when they were nearby. Jake was one of them. Big. Lumbering. Looked like he'd be dumb as a sack of rocks. But weirdly clever when it came to insults. Like he enjoyed thinking them up. Then there was Jonah. Completely unremarkable on the outside. Except for the cruel twinkle in his eye. Jonah had a tongue that could cut as deep as any punch. And believe me, they did both. Insults. Punches. Shoves. A rotating cast of sidekicks followed them around, boys whose faces I can't even remember now. But Jake and Jonah. They were always there. Constant. Relentless. They were always there. Always needling. Always kicking the backs of our shoes when we walked down the halls. Or pouring glue into an unattended school bag. Or slicing the end off someone's necktie with a pair of scissors. If we were shoved on the stairs, really shoved hard, you could be sure that Jake and Jonah were nearby. Smiling. That slow, malevolent kind of smile that makes your stomach turn. If someone lobbed a bottle at my head during lunch. If a rock bounced off my backpack while we waited for the bus. I knew. I knew they were close. Always close. Every punch. Every jab. Every awful, humiliating moment that stuck in my mind afterward. It all seemed to trace back to those two. Jake and Jonah. And it didn't matter whether Clarky and I were together or apart. They found us. Every day. Multiple times a day. Like bloodhounds on a scent. And what was our crime, exactly? What had we done to offend them so much? No one ever said. They never explained. It was just a known thing. Some twisted, established fact. Our existence disgusted them. So we would suffer for it. You probably already know how bullies are. You've read stories. Heard accounts. Seen the damage. But let me tell you. They were worse back then. And we hated school. Every single day from September to Christmas that first year was hell. Then spring term came, and it got worse. Much worse. How our parents never noticed, I'll never understand. It used to drive me mad. Didn't they see the bags under our eyes? How we'd stopped smiling. Stopped talking as much? Didn't they hear the silence at dinner? Why didn't I just tell them? Why didn't either of us say something? Well. Because back then, you didn't tell. You just didn't. Telling someone, dobbying someone in, we called it, was a fate worse than death. Even kids who liked you would turn on you if you snitched. Even if it was about a bully. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, I know now how absolutely stupid that was. Anyone who'd hate you for exposing cruelty isn't worth keeping around. But when you're 12, logic doesn't matter. You're not working with an adult brain. You're working with fear. And shame. Then came summer term. And with it, something new. Something unexpected. The school pool. We knew there was a school pool, of course. It was that big, echoey building set apart from the main block. But it had always seemed like a place for other kids. Older kids. Cool kids. But then. There it was. Printed right there on our summer term lesson plans. Swimming. My entire form group erupted in cheers when they saw it. There was actual rejoicing in that grim, gray classroom. Even I felt a flicker of excitement. Even Clarky smiled for the first time in weeks. Finally, something to look forward to. I didn't particularly care either way. Not about swimming. Not about anything, really. Not when I was that depressed, just beaten down by all the bullying. But that changed. It changed the moment I dragged myself to swimming class that first week, and saw Clarky. He was waiting there, standing in line outside the changing rooms. Turned out, the summer PE lessons were split by gender. Boys did swimming while girls did netball. Then later in the week, girls got their turn in the pool while we played cricket. I hated cricket. But that's beside the point. Swimming was fun. And better yet, it meant I actually got to spend time with Clarky again. In a classroom, no less. It was about 5 lessons in. Swimming was always on Mondays, the very last period of the day. We loved that. We'd linger behind in the changing rooms after class, waiting for everyone else to clear out before we showered and got dressed. Because when you're a bullying victim, you learn. You learn never to be vulnerable in front of others. Back then, health and safety wasn't really a thing. Our PE teacher had already wandered off, probably desperate for a cigarette and a quick coffee. He even tossed us the keys to the changing room. Told us to lock up when we were done. For all the torment we got from other students, adults still kind of liked us, I guess. Man, Clarky said as we stood in our trunks, the last 2 left. Swimming's fun. I grinned. We could go back in. His eyes lit up. Let's do it. And I was so stunned, so relieved, to see that spark of life back in him. That I didn't think twice. Didn't hesitate. I just ran straight back into the pool room and cannonballed in. I didn't think about how much trouble we could get in. Nobody had really drilled into us how dangerous it was to swim unsupervised. Another failure in the system, I guess. We figured, as long as we stayed out of the deep end, what harm could it do? It was just water. Just a little fun. We were laughing. Loud, echoing barks of laughter bouncing off the tiled walls. The acoustics made everything sound bigger, brighter. We felt free. For the first time in ages. Then I heard footsteps. And I stopped laughing. I surfaced. And saw Jonah and Jake. They were strolling in from the changing rooms. Fully dressed. Shirts. Ties. Blazers. Shoes still on. My skin went cold, like the water around me had turned to ice. Even with the warm pool heating humming in the background, I felt goosebumps rise all over me. Clarky swam closer and whispered, "What are they doing here?" Well, Jonah said. If it isn't the little idiots. That's what he always called us. Not exactly creative. But effective. I whispered, "Ah, crap." We were in the middle of the pool. Nowhere near the ladders. Nowhere near the edge. And even if we made it out. Jonah and Jake were standing right in front of the only exit. Blocking the door back to the changing room. "What's that idiot one?" Jake asked, smirking. "Come here," Jonah said. Neither Clarky nor I moved. Jonah suddenly clapped, loud and sharp. Then lunged forward like he was about to jump into the pool. We both flinched. "Come here," he barked again. "We're not gonna hurt you," Jake said, tone soft but mocking. "Yeah," Jonah added. "We think it's neat that you broke in here. Maybe you're sound." "Sound as pound," Jake echoed. "We had to swim over. What choice did we have?" If you ever swam in a British pool back in the 70s or 80s, you might remember those drainage holes along the sides. They were covered by plastic or metal grates. In some pools, they were bolted down. In others, they were loose. At our school's pool, they were supposed to be bolted. But I guess this one had come loose. Because Jonah bent down and casually lifted it up. "Dare you to stick your head in the hole," he grinned. The water lapped gently over the gap in the tiles. I shook my head. "Come on, boys," Jake said. "Be cool. We'll be nice to you if you do it." I shook my head again, firmer this time. To this day, I have no idea why Clarky did it. Why he leaned in. Why he even considered it. Really, what did he think they'd do? Did he honestly believe that sticking his head in there would make our worst tormentors like us? Make them our friends? Maybe he didn't think his head would actually fit. Clarky was tiny for his age, barely came up to my shoulder. I was over a head taller than him. He peered down into the hole. "What's down there?" he asked, voice small. Jake grinned. "Take a look." Clarky surfaced for a second. "How?" he asked. "Just put your head in and lean over the edge," Jake said. So Clarky did. He floated up, angled his body, and slowly leaned into the hole. Then Jonah shoved the grate down. Hard. Clarky's head sank deeper into the hole. He kicked. Floundered. I swam beside him, shouting, "Let him out." He twisted and splashed in a panic, trying to surface, but couldn't. Jonah just stood there. One foot planted firmly on the grate. Head thrown back, laughing like a bloody cartoon villain. Clarky flailed harder. Then, snap. A horrible, muted cracking sound filled the water. Even muffled, I heard it. I felt it. It was the worst sound I've ever heard in my life. And then, Clarky went still. His arms stopped thrashing. His legs stopped kicking. His body just floated there, slowly drifting downward. Head still wedged into the grate. The angle of his neck, impossible. Jake noticed it first. He tugged Jonah's sleeve. Pointed. Jonah froze. Completely. Then he went white. His hands started shaking. He looked at Clarky. Then at me. His eyes locked onto mine. He stared for a second. And then he said, trembling, "Please don't tell anyone." His voice broke. He looked like he was about to cry. And then, he and Jake turned and ran. Gone. "Please don't tell anyone." There was no threat in Jonah's voice. No anger. Just a desperate, broken plea. I ripped the grate off and pulled Clarky free. But it was too late. His neck rolled limply on his shoulders. The angle had been terrible, he'd broken his own neck struggling to get free. I thought Jonah and Jake had run away for good. But I was shaking and crying, cradling Clarky in my arms, trying to figure out what to do next. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait long. They came back. The PE teacher was with them, another teacher too. They'd gone to get help. There was no chance for Jonah and Jake to pretend they weren't involved. It was clear they knew something was wrong and had gone to get help deliberately. Afterwards, I had a terrible choice to make. Should I tell the truth, that Jonah had essentially killed Clarky? In the end, I went along with the story we all told. We'd been messing about in the pool. Clarky had stuck his head in the grate on a dare. He got stuck and hurt himself. I never said Jonah was standing on the grate at the time. Maybe that was wrong. But I honestly believe Jonah was remorseful. It would have ruined his life if I'd told the whole truth. Maybe he deserved it. But I just couldn't. No one really believed our story anyway. People just thought the three of us had accidentally caused Clarky's death. His parents could never look at me or speak to me again. My own parents barely looked at me for weeks, though they never said I was to blame. The bullying stopped after that. Not just from Jake and Jonah, but from everyone. More than once, I caught kids looking at me with a strange mix of fear and awe. I wasn't sure if they thought I'd snapped someone's neck or if Jonah and Jake had warned them off. Either way, nearly 50 years have passed. God, I'm old now. And I still miss my best friend. Clarky didn't deserve what happened to him. He was the sweetest, kindest boy. He just wanted to be liked. But now he's gone. And I've never spoken up about exactly how he died. I don't know what happened to Jake and Jonah after school. I've never tried to find out. I hope they made something of their lives. And I hope Jonah hasn't wasted the chance I gave him by keeping quiet. Because I want to believe Clarky would have approved of that decision. Story number 3. I attended a charter school in Minnesota in the early 90s. That was when this type of school was really popping off. A new one had opened the year before I was due to start, and I guess it appealed to my parents. In my memory, the school was in a converted mansion. But I was about 5 years old then, so who knows how accurate that memory really is. I remember it being a damp, musty place with only a small number of students. Us little kids were on the first floor. Then the classrooms for older kids were on the next floor up. Above that were the teachers' rooms, and then an attic at the very top. As you moved through the school system, you moved deeper into the building. I guess I didn't stay there long enough to have classes on the second floor, so I don't really remember what those rooms were like. I do remember being in the attic once or twice, though. Maybe once at Christmas. I can't remember why exactly, but just thinking about it now makes me feel weird and unsettled. I hate it when someone says, "Now for a bit of backstory, but you need to know a little bit about the family that ran the school." So here goes. There was our principal, Mrs. Howe. She ran the school. If you've ever seen the old British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, that's exactly what Mrs. Howe looked like. Honestly, she could have been her twin. Then there was her husband, Mr. Howe. Looking back, I had no idea what he actually did at the school. He seemed like some kind of businessman. He'd occasionally teach us children's subjects, but I don't think he was actually a teacher by profession. He was a weird guy. I remember him as ridiculously tall and lanky, with thinning hair and wet, watery eyes. He'd mumble and sort of stutter when he talked. But if he got mad at you, he got really mad. His face would go bright red, and his eyes would bulge when he yelled. We were all a bit afraid of him. But at the same time, I think we were kind of disgusted, too. He just had this weird air about him, like something gross and off for reasons no one could really explain. Mrs. Howe, on the other hand, I remember as pretty stern most of the time. But every now and then, out of the blue, she'd be really nice. Especially to me. One Christmas, she even gave me a present. I never understood why back then. None of the other kids got a Christmas gift from the principal. The Howe family had 3 kids. One of them, let's call him Wally, was in the same class as me. Nowadays, I guess you'd say he was special needs. He was really clumsy, a little gangly kid who was happy most of the time. Except when he hurt himself, which was pretty often. Then he'd howl and cry for a good while. You always knew when he was coming into the classroom because he'd somehow crash through desks and chairs, sending everything flying. Then there was the middle child. She must have been a high schooler. She was only around occasionally, usually after classes, on weekends, or at some event where her parents dragged her along. She was a pretty typical 90s goth-looking girl. As a little kid, I didn't know anything about her. She was just kind of there. Then there was the oldest son, Dom. He was in his early 20s and had just come back from college after graduating. We didn't think much of it as kids, but looking back, he was hanging around that school all the damn time. It was just the principal's adult son lurking around the elementary school. He seemed like a normal guy, although he was extremely tall. Almost every memory I have from the 2 years I spent at that school, he was there. Whether it was sports day, the Christmas festival, a bake sale, or just during regular school weeks, he was around. I'm not sure if I'm remembering his looming presence more than it really was, but you can see how this is weird already, right? They were a strange family. Of course, a little kid doesn't really notice things like that. I didn't think much about how odd it was to have both a strange husband and his weird adult son just hanging around the school all the time. Eventually, though, I did find it weird. And later on, terrifying. This school had a pool. It was in the countryside, just past the suburbs, with lots of trees around the edges of the grounds. The pool was an outdoor one, built in a forest canopy just down a path from the play areas where we had recess, and to the right of the school's playing field. That first summer at the school, we didn't use the swimming pool at all. I remember all the kids being super disappointed. We had been so excited when we first saw it. The second year, though, there was a really hot summer starting in early May. They hired people to clean the pool and give it a complete overhaul. It was a huge deal. Everyone was excited that the pool would finally be used again. Before that, the pool had become a bit taboo. We'd get yelled at massively if we went near it when we weren't supposed to. I guess that's fair. It would have been dangerous if anyone fell into the uncovered pool. It was always uncovered back then. The water was filled with leaves, tree branches, insects, and it was really foul and disgusting. Instead of buying a cover or hiring a pool cleaner, the school just instilled a real fear into us not to go near it. But then they cleaned it, got an actual cover, and we were allowed near it again. We had swimming lessons overseen by our teachers, and there was a recreational swimming club on Thursdays where we could just play in the pool with floaties and toys. The dressing rooms were 2 small shacks under the tree line, one for boys, one for girls. They were old buildings. I never knew what the school was before it became a school, but the changing rooms felt like they came from that earlier time. Despite being a fairly expensive charter school, they didn't spend much money on upkeep as far as I can remember. I guess cleaning the pool had used up their budget, because the changing rooms were absolutely foul. You had to be really careful not to sit on or brush against the benches. They were wooden and splintery. There were spiders and other insects everywhere. It was just gross and icky. Often, if we had swimming lessons that day, we'd wear our swimsuits under our clothes to school to avoid changing in those nasty rooms. We also had a rule that we were never allowed to lock any doors at the school. This was because one kid had once gotten locked in a bathroom stall for an entire lunch break and had a panic attack. Instead of fixing the locks, the school just told us never to lock doors so no one would get stuck anywhere again. We didn't even think about locking the dressing rooms, even though they had old bolt-type locks. This is why Dom, the weird adult son I mentioned earlier, was able to just stroll into the dressing rooms whenever he wanted. I don't know why Dom was the one tasked with making sure the kids were changed and ready for swimming. He sometimes oversaw us in the pool, but he wasn't really a teacher. Just the principal's adult son. For sure, they wouldn't get away with this nowadays. At least, I hope not. But back in the early 90s, at a charter school, it was absolutely possible, especially when you know certain things about this school that I'll eventually get to. Anyway, it wasn't unusual for Dom to burst in on kids changing. He even made a joke of it, bursting in yelling, "Boo." Of course, we all laughed at this. It was just a boy bursting in on other boys. He never did it to the girls. Even back then, though, I didn't like it at all. But at that age, I had my own issues going on and really struggled to say how uncomfortable or scared I felt. One particular day, near summer break, it was blisteringly hot outside. A very sweaty day, and I was dragging my heels. The rest of my friends had already changed and were in the pool. I was taking my time getting into my swim trunks. I hadn't remembered to wear them from home, so I was halfway through changing when the door creaked open. "Boo!" Dom said. His voice was quieter than usual. I'm sure he knew I was alone in there, but I didn't think that at the time. My heart immediately started pounding. I'd only been alone with Dom once before, in the attic that previous Christmas, and he had made me feel super uncomfortable and scared then. He made me feel the same way now. "Hurry it up, Ben," he told me. "Everyone's out there playing already." I expected Dom to leave, but he didn't. The door swung shut behind him, and he just stood there watching me with his arms folded. I was holding my swim trunks in front of myself, and the only way I could put them on was right there in front of Dom. A cold feeling settled deep in my belly, something I'd never really felt before. I really didn't want to do this in front of him. But he was an adult and the principal's son, and I didn't want to get in trouble by saying anything. So, I compromised. I turned my back to him and quickly slipped the trunks up my legs. "Boo!" Dom grabbed my shoulders. I hadn't heard him come up behind me. In the split second it took me to realize what was happening, imagining him sneaking up on me while I was changing. I felt awful in a way I can't describe. I whirled around and fell backward against the bench. It was rough and splintery and cut into my bare legs. Immediately, I started crying. I was just a little kid, scared and hurt. Dom's face got angry. "Hey, don't cry," he scolded. "I was just playing a trick on you. Don't be a little baby." He reached forward and grabbed my arm hard. It hurt. He pulled me to my feet and around him. Again, it really hurt. I wasn't used to physical punishment, and I worried he was going to spank me or something. I don't know if I intentionally shoved him or if he tripped. Now, officially, he tripped, at least that's what he would say. Of course, he wouldn't want to explain what he'd been doing to me in the first place. He stumbled backward slightly and knocked against the flimsy wall of the dressing room. Suddenly, I heard a sound I wasn't expecting at all. A strange thump. Then a wild, strong buzzing. Something had been knocked clear from the rafters of the changing room. It was a wasp nest, an angry, disturbed wasp nest, falling to the floor in the tiny confines of the room. Almost immediately, a huge cloud of wasps swarmed out of the shattered paper hive. Dom let out a strangled cry as the buzzing grew louder, angry wasps heading toward him. Then he ran forward and shoved me fully out of the way. I fell back and hit the wall on the other side. It took him a moment to open the door. I can't say for sure, because it was chaos with the wasps everywhere, but I'm certain he had to unlock the door to get out. That means he locked it behind him when he came in. Whether that detail is something I added later in my mind, I don't know, but I don't think so. Dom ran out screaming like a high-pitched weirdo. The cloud of wasps followed him. I was already crying, but fresh tears welled up as I felt a sting on my right shoulder. Just one sting, though. When I went outside, chaos was everywhere. Dom himself was swatting and flapping at the wasps with his bare hands, still shrieking over and over. I just ran to where my friends were and got out of there. It took a while for the wasps to disperse and for some teacher to recover our clothes. So, we all sat around on the playing fields in our swimsuits. Nothing really happened immediately after all this. We didn't see Dom at school again. I heard he suffered a lot of wasp stings. Good. Teachers were swatting towels at the wasps while others ushered the kids out of the pool. He creeper. When that school year ended, I was told during the summer that I'd be changing to a different school next semester. It was never explained why, but I didn't need to ask. Even at that age, I knew Dom had tried to do something really bad. That was a good enough reason for me to leave that school. I didn't really mind leaving my friends. I had friends who already went to the new school, so I thought it would be fun. I only found out much later that things were a lot weirder and creepier than I'd known. The principal and her husband were basically scammers. They ran the school to collect charter funding and tuition fees, but spent the bare minimum on upkeep, curriculum, and student safety. Some real tax dodging was going on. Eventually, Mr. Howe was pursued by the law for fraud or embezzlement. That's a wild story itself, but I can't share the details. They're so uniquely weird that it would be too easy to figure out who these people were. Not that I want to protect them, just myself. Maybe I'm being overly cautious. They were bad people, after all. The principal was still out there, though. Who knows, maybe she could still be litigious. Dom, however, isn't out there anymore. My mom found out through the local paper a few years later that Dom had been sent to prison for completely unrelated crimes. Yeah. In his 40s, he got into a relationship with a woman who had 2 kids, and abused both of them. I don't know the details of the abuse, and I don't want to. It chills me enough to know how lucky I was to escape. I try not to fixate on the fact that I'm sure the changing room door was locked when he tried to leave. Maybe I would have been fine. But that doesn't stop me from thanking God for those wasps. I hope it really hurt when they stung that predator, because he absolutely deserved that and far, far worse. Story number 4. It was late summer, and at the time, I was a 21-year-old female finishing up college before med school. The only important detail really is that we were a group of 4 girls, all around 20 to 21, having a small pool party in a raised backyard pool at our shared house. It was maybe around 10 p.m., possibly a bit earlier. We'd been drinking on and off for about an hour or 2, and spirits were high. We were having fun. We were relaxed and chilled out. It was the perfect evening. The sun was beginning to set over the forest on the outskirts of our suburban property. The mouth-watering smell of the Petersons' barbecue was making me hungry. It seemed like they'd had the same idea as us, to have a backyard party. Sometimes, when our music paused, you could hear theirs in the background. There had been a bunch of kids at the Petersons' party earlier, but now the raucous noise of children playing had died down, and everything was chill. The girls and I were just kicking back, listening to whatever was popular with us back then, and enjoying some downtime after a grueling year of studying, work, and personal drama. We were drinking cocktails, the glasses sitting on the side of the outdoor above-ground pool, just having a good time. We were doing absolutely nothing to invite or deserve what came next. The back gate to our property opened. This wasn't particularly alarming in itself. There were 5 of us total living in that house, and Janet B. was out at work and expected home soon. It could have been Claire or Dana's boyfriends or any number of people really. Our house was gathering central back then, and it was normal for trusted people to let themselves in the back gate instead of coming in the front door, especially if they could hear us partying in the yard. I couldn't see the gate myself from the pool, I had my back to it. But I could tell from Kelly and Claire's reactions that whoever had entered through the back gate shouldn't have been there. "Who the hell are they?" Kelly asked. I turned around the pool and saw 3 guys strolling into the yard. They looked college age and sauntered over with the kind of confidence I'd seen in a million frat dudes. I didn't recognize any of them, but maybe one of the girls did. Alarm bells weren't ringing just yet. "Can we help you guys?" Dana asked. A quick look at Claire and Kelly told me they didn't know the boys either. The lead frat guy gave this big, stupid grin. And even then, without any real evidence, I had a strong feeling we might be in trouble. He looked almost wolfish and predatory, and I didn't like it. "We were just in the area. Thought we'd swing by," he said, or something like that. Kelly, always the smartass, told him he should swing back out the way he came. That made him laugh. No, seriously, I said. Are you guys looking for Janet? They shot a look at each other. Janet? Sure, the bigger guy in the back said. They introduced themselves, probably with made-up names, I thought later. I don't remember what they said their names were, so I'll just call them Chad, Brad, and Vlad when I tell this story. Might as well get some fun out of an otherwise horrible incident. Well, Janet's at work, I told them. I'm not sure when she'll be back. Chad at the front beamed again. Well, that's fine. We'll wait. Why are you looking for Janet? Claire asked. Oh, you know, she owes us, Brad said. Janet was the most sensible of all of us. She was the least likely to owe anyone money and the most likely to be at work while the rest of us had a pool party. I guess I grilled them on it because Chad came up to the pool ledge. Yeah, she owes us, but any of you can pay up on her behalf if you're so inclined, he said. Yeah, no thanks, I said. To explain our outdoor pool, it was one of those above-ground units that could be assembled, disassembled, and moved, rather than a pool built into the ground. It was sort of halfway between a pool and a hot tub. Like a hot tub, but bigger, and without jets or heating. You know the type of old pool I mean. Getting in and out required a ladder, a separate piece that clipped over the side of the pool. One side of the ladder went vertically down into the pool, and the other angled outward like a playground slide. Without the ladder, it was technically possible to get out by dragging yourself over the side and falling onto the grass. But it was awkward as hell and extremely undignified. Fine when you were alone, but not in front of these strange guys. That's why it was so alarming when almost immediately Vlad silently lifted the ladder up and away from the pool. Hey, don't be a dick, Kelly said, swimming over to that side. I sighed and rolled my eyes. I still wasn't actually scared yet. The boys had been so bold coming into the yard. I was certain they had to be connected to one of us. Could it really be sweet, square Janet? Hey, just making sure you stay where we can keep an eye on you, Chad said. His voice seemed filled with cruel teasing. Yeah, we don't want you to attack us, Brad added. That's not what I meant, dumbass, Chad snapped, like he was mad Brad had chimed in on his oh-so-hilarious joke. All three of them were staring us up and down, their eyes traveling across our bodies. We were all in hot bikinis, and the sun had almost fully set. But the garden was lit up brightly by our outdoor lighting. I strained to hear whether the Petersons were still in their yard, and I thought so. That felt reassuring. If anything too bad started to happen, I could yell out to them pretty easily. The boys talked to us for a few minutes about some nonsense I don't really remember. All the while, the three of them circled the pool like coyotes. It felt like they had rehearsed this. They could tell they were unnerving us, that we were vulnerable, and I knew they were enjoying it. Then Chad started messing around, trying to dunk Claire. If Janet was the sensible one, Claire was the shy one, least likely to enjoy that kind of horseplay. F off. Claire yelled. Don't touch me. Hey, chill out, babe. I'm just having fun, Chad said, acting all hurt. Yeah, I think it's time for you guys to leave, Dana said, beginning to pull herself over the side of the pool. In the blink of an eye, the almost silent Vlad darted over and shoved her quite forcefully back into the pool. That's when I knew we were actually in potential danger. Hey, don't shove her. I yelled, hoping the Petersons could hear us by now. Chad's face suddenly turned serious. I suggest you, __, shut up. Start talking, he said. Talking about what? I asked. I looked at my friends and realized Kelly, the loudest, most outspoken, most confident one of us, had been strangely quiet through most of this. Kelly, do you know these guys? I asked, and she shook her head. No, I don't know them. But so it's you, Chad said, pacing over to Kelly. The three of us instinctively closed in around her, only the pool walls between us and those guys. What's you? Dana asked. She's the one seeing our good friend Pete, Chad said. Kelly had been seeing a new guy recently, Pete. Dana and Janet didn't like him much, but I did. He was a bit of a stoner, didn't take things too seriously. Not long-term material for Kelly, or so I thought. He seemed fun enough for a fling. You're friends of Pete? Kelly asked, seeming relieved. Well, he wishes, Chad said. Pete owes us a lot of money, and we thought the other girl was his piece, but if it's you, maybe you can pay the debt. How much? Kelly asked, looking sick. I was still glancing toward the Petersons' yard. Don't even think about it, Brad growled, grabbing my shoulder. At the same time, Chad grabbed Kelly and Vlad grabbed Dana. Claire shrieked and backed up to the center of the pool. Stay right there, Chad told her. Then, as if to demonstrate why, the three boys dunked us all underwater and held us there. It wasn't hard to slip out of their grasp. We weren't in danger of drowning, but it still hurt, and it was still terrible. We joined Claire in the center of the pool. That's when things started to get very unpleasant. If any of you scream or try to get out or do anything, then I promise you we will hurt you really, really badly, Chad said. He pulled out a switchblade from his pocket. Just a small thing, but I could tell in the dim light that it was incredibly sharp. I also knew exactly how much damage 3 grown men could do to 4 bikini-clad women before anyone could get there. Please just leave us alone, Dana said. Pete isn't even here. He's not even stopping by tonight. Well, that just sucks for you girls then, Chad said. We want our money. We need it. And this one here is Pete's girl. So, how much does he owe? Maybe we can pay you. I asked, how much? Chad started eyeing me up. He owes us $20. I kept eye contact with him, and then he suddenly burst out laughing. Brad joined in, and their cackling started to grate on me. No, he owes us some serious moolah, babe, Chad said. 5 grand. Oh God. None of us had anywhere near $5,000 lying around the house. Even if we wanted to hand it over to these weirdos, there was no way. What the hell does Pete owe 5 grand for? Kelly demanded. Chad made an exaggerated sniffing sound and rubbed his nose. Oh, this and that. Pete usually had a stash of harder stuff than I was used to. He often had small baggies of coke, MDMA, and things like that. Kelly had met him when she was trying to score some weed. So it wasn't too far-fetched to imagine that he dealt coke and owed these guys. I always assumed people like Pete got their drugs from more cartel-like types, but I was wrong. I've since realized dealers exist at every level, in all walks of life. Yeah. So, either you pay us yourself, or you get Pete over here to settle his debt. Or maybe you girls could pay us back some other way. Chad chuckled. Brad clearly liked this idea, and he stared at me in particular, which I really didn't appreciate. Ew, no thanks, I said, considering what to do in that moment. We could rush them or rush for the back gate, but we'd have to get out of the pool first. If all of us did it, maybe one of us could get away, but what would those guys do to the rest in the meantime? And how could I communicate a plan without them hearing? Claire had drifted to the other side of the pool, maybe just to get some distance. We were so focused on Chad and Brad that we didn't notice Vlad had circled around. When Claire got close enough, he grabbed her by the hair. She let out a small yell before his hand clamped over her mouth. Well, someone better make a decision soon, or we're really going to hurt this one, Chad said. Claire's eyes started to fill with tears. She looked genuinely terrified, and my heart broke for her. I can go call Pete, I remember Kelly saying. This was before smartphones. It was the era of brick-like Nokias, and we all had cell phones, but we weren't glued to them, and we didn't bring them near water. So none of us had one at the pool. The only way Kelly could call Pete was by going inside. She told the boys that. Chad considered it. "Fine, I'll go with you," he said. "Brad, Vlad, you watch these other lovely young ladies." He didn't say, "lovely young ladies." He said a nastier slur that I'm not going to repeat. "Kelly, don't." "I'll call Pete and it'll be fine," she said, but her face said otherwise. Chad helped Kelly over the side of the pool and guided her to the back door, gripping her arm. She opened the sliding glass door, and I could see everything from the middle of the pool. I saw a flash of movement and heard a loud shattering crash. Kelly had grabbed the lamp off that table just inside the door and smashed it right into Chad's face. He let out a huge bellowing scream and staggered back, falling over one of the patio chairs. Blood began to pour down his face. Thank God, I thought. But Kelly wasn't done. She came running back into the yard, screaming and calling for help at the top of her lungs. So loud, the neighbors heard her. Quickly, the rest of us joined in. Kelly charged at Brad, swinging something she'd grabbed from inside. It was one of the golf clubs Dana's boyfriend Chris always left lying around. And Chris never got scolded for leaving these clubs out again. After this, Kelly swung the club down hard, cracking Brad's forearm as he tried to defend himself. Chad was already bolting for that gate, and I swear I saw a shard of lamp sticking from his cheek. He ripped the gate open and ran, with Brad stumbling out after him. It felt like only seconds later when Mr. Peterson and a couple of other adult men rushed in. "They're getting away!" Kelly screamed. But the men were more focused on checking in on us. They really had no idea what was going on. Vlad, for some reason, just kind of stuck around and was standing there dumbfounded. "He's one of them," I told Mr. Peterson. One of his friends, who turned out to be an off-duty cop, grabbed Vlad and pinned him to the ground, basically sitting on him like a pro wrestler. It was a pretty hardcore ending to a terrifying, horrible experience. We called the cops and told them everything. They spoke to Pete, who denied owing these guys anything, but he was able to identify them. They were juniors at our college, too. Trying to get them charged for what they did was rough since the only ones injured were Chad and Brad. We were going to push for assault charges, but in the end, we settled out of court with their families. Their parents were super embarrassed by their dumbass sons. It wasn't a great payday, and no, it didn't feel worth it. I wish we would have done more to punish them. But at least the drug stuff wasn't something their families could buy their way out of completely. They avoided jail because, of course, money always talks, but they still got hit with some real consequences. Expelled, probation, all kinds of things. And they knew better than to ever come near any of us again. Chad also had a wicked scar from that lamp. I remember hearing that. Cooler than he deserved, honestly, but I doubt he thought so. You'd think Kelly would break up with Pete after all that, but no. I'm not kidding when I say they eventually got married, had a kid, and are still together to this day. We stayed in that house until our lease ended and then eventually moved out. Kelly and I stayed close, but the rest of the girls, including Janet, who hadn't been there that night, eventually drifted away. Kelly and I are still friends, and both she and Pete gave me permission to share this story. And you'll be glad to know that we've all settled down. Pete's a great dad, and both he and Kelly are nurses now. As for me, I'll keep that to myself. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm not a swimmer.